for Warringah.
I ask leave of the House to move amendments 1 and 2 as circulated in my name together.
Is leave granted? Give the call to the Minister. Leave is granted. Give the call to the honourable member for Warringah.
I move amendments 1 and 2 as circulated in my name together. These amendments are important. Earlier today, I spoke in this House regarding my concerns in relation to the Offshore Petroleum and Greenhouse Gas Storage Legislation Amendment, Safety and Other Measures Bill 2024. The amendments I am moving remove Part 2, Schedule 2 from the bill. Part 2, Schedule 2 is completely off-topic when it comes to the primary purpose of this bill, which is to improve the condition of workers in the offshore gas industry. Instead, it is a sneaky attempt by the government to include in an otherwise non-contentious bill significant carve-outs for the gas industry from environmental regulations and the requirements of the Offshore Petroleum and Greenhouse Gas Storage legislation and regulations themselves. It does this by providing in Part 2 a new clause, 790E, which enables existing projects approved by the National Offshore Petroleum Safety and Environmental Management Authority, NOPSEMA, to undertake additional actions that may be inconsistent with future regulatory changes. A get-out-of-free-jail card delivered to the oil and gas industry. This get-out-of-free-jail card is being provided to a polluting and environmentally damaging industry in the midst of the government's major reforms to the Environment Protection, Biodiversity and Conservation Act, outlined in its nature-positive reforms. But gaslighting the Australian public and making a mockery of the government's climate and environmental reforms is this legislation. Undermining federal court decisions that have affirmed the need to consult First Nations people who have a connection with the land in environmental plans approved by NOPSEMA. Undermining the government's own referendum agenda to give a voice and listen to First Nations communities. There is absolutely no reason or place for providing this carve-out. There is no justification to streamline the approvals process for these polluting projects at the expense of our environmental and consultation laws and improvements we anticipate to them over the coming months. In what appears to be a response to the Senate inquiry into this bill, the government yesterday circulated amendments, but it is understood that they will not go far enough, and in fact they maintain this carve-out. They provide a sunsetting clause and a series of hurdles being the discretions of the Minister of Resources and the Minister for the Environment to determine if future changes to the Offshore Petroleum and Greenhouse Gas Storage Act are consistent with the principles of ecologically sustainable development principles. I mean, the irony of it when we are faced with this legislation. In the event the regulations are deemed not to be consistent with those principles, the get-out-of-free-jail card loses its currency. But if those regulations are deemed to be consistent, then we remain in this situation. I do not accept that these amendments are sufficient to address my concerns. Firstly, there is too much ministerial discretion, particularly for the Minister for Resources, whose agenda often appears to be completely aligned with the gas industry and not proper environmental protection. And we only need to remember the last parliament, where in fact the Prime Minister stepped in to be Minister for Resources, which begs the question, it is not good environmental protection to hand this power solely into the Minister for Resources. Secondly, the clauses, particularly the sunsetting clause, is convoluted and contains far too many loopholes to instil any confidence that existing endorsed projects and plans will be subject to future native positive plans. The government can easily commence a series of reforms on timelines that effectively cause the sun to never set. And therefore this amendment to repeal Part 2, Schedule 2 is absolutely essential to ensure proper scrutiny around offshore gas projects and curtail this carve-out that the Minister for Resources is seeking for herself. It is telling that in this debate we have just seen the government gag second-reading speeches from the crossbench. It is telling not a single member of government or backbencher was willing to defend this terrible bill and these terrible provisions. It is telling that the Minister for the Environment has not stepped up to say that she is fine with the idea that the Minister for Resources supersedes her on offshore gas projects, or the Minister for Indigenous Australians has not stepped up to say she's okay with First Nations communities' voice to be silenced, especially in the aftermath of the voice. It makes a mockery of the government's position when it comes to climate action. It makes a mockery to its stated desire to listen to First Nations people.